Hello, and welcome to Sound Off with System One. I'm your host, Krista Korenchuk, and I'm here today with our panel of experts to talk with you about how to prepare for the toughest interview questions. Before we get started, here are a few words about System One. System One is a leading provider of specialized, highly technical outsourced services, workforce solutions to critical infrastructure, technology, life science, and government sectors, putting more than 650 employees and 9,000 contractors to work in the United States, Canada, and the UK. As you're tuning in today, please join us in the comments. Our marketing team will be monitoring them. Let us know where you're joining from and what industry you work in. And if you have any questions relevant to today's topics, please drop them in there as well, and we'll try to answer as many of those questions as possible. We're also going to have our panel of experts introduce themselves. They will be discussing a hot job, which you can see by scanning the QR code or visiting jobs.system1.com. Owen, we'll start with you.
Hi, Krista. Thanks for having me on. My name is Owen Nini. I'm a recruiter with System One. I've been here about 5 years in our Pittsburgh office. My hot job today is a mechanical engineer. It's in Ford City, PA, about an hour northeast of the city of Pittsburgh. I'm looking for somebody with a BSME, about 3 to 5 years of experience making specialty, highly regulated kind of products.
My name is Dennis Early. Krista, thank you very much for having me today. I'm a part of Alta IT, a System One's company. I have been around for about 5 years. I'm a senior technical recruiter, and my hot job today is in Atlanta with an excellent client of ours that we've had great success with and a wonderful relationship. It's a senior data engineer. They're looking for some pretty specific functions that this person's going to be doing. Please check out the job to understand the details of it. It is a full-time role, so it is a hybrid on-site opportunity, and it's a great fit for the right person.
Fantastic. And again, you can scan the QR code or go to jobs.system1.com to see these jobs or any other available System One jobs. And without further ado, we are going to get started with our topic. Again, we're discussing how to prepare for the toughest interview questions. Our first question are, what are some of the tough interview questions candidates can expect, and why are they asked? Dennis, we'll start with you.
You know, one of the reasons why employers ask tough questions is to gauge how you handle stress or how things work on, spur of the moment. Try to throw people off guard just to kind of understand how your initial response is to that stressor. I always suggest folks, any of those questions that you might be asked, they might be personal, they might be financial, they might be about a background. Take a breath before you answer the question. Make sure if you're unclear on the question, ask them to repeat themselves or ask any clarification first. Not only does it make sure that you understand what the question actually is and you don't jump to a conclusion, but you also give yourself an extra few seconds in order to kind of process how you want to formulate that answer. As that interview experience is going on, just be prepared. Know that you're probably going to be asked unexpected questions.
Sure. And to piggyback off of that, I think the most difficult questions are the open-ended ones. They really are. Even the tell me about yourself. Questions like that. It's trying to be realistic and wouldn't want to scare anybody from an interview, but as much as interviews are for companies to get to know you and for you to know companies, these companies aren't really blind. They understand it's difficult to get to know somebody, only meeting them once or twice for a couple hours. So interviews very much become about making sure you don't have red flags. If you have open-ended questions or a little less formulaic, there are more opportunities for you to trip up, basically. So those become the most difficult ones.
Absolutely. And that's why utilizing a recruiter can be so important. They can help you practice. It really just gives you another opportunity to, have an ear and get that positive feedback. How can candidates demonstrate their ability to handle stress and pressure when faced with the tough questions? Owen, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, the easiest ways, if you're faced with a tough question during the interview, is to, like Dennis said, take a pause, take a breath, be composed, be thoughtful in your answer. I think composure is the most important part when it comes to stress. I mean, everybody deals with stress on the job. The interviewer knows this. It's, like I said, about avoiding the red flags, about not reacting in the wrong way, more than it is about reacting in the right way, if that makes any sense.
Exactly, Owen. One of the other thing that I also recommend candidates do is use an example of a time of a stressful situation, also to show how you handle your stress in a work, preferably in a work environment. That you can say, "Hey, we're under this stress," and use an example of how you've also navigated in stress in the past when you get faced with a question. How do you handle stress? Well, here's how I did it. Give them an example. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's beneficial to have a few example ideas before the interview. So when those questions inevitably come up, you'll be ready to answer them, without the red flags, of course. And how should candidates approach behavioral interview questions, such as tell me about a time you failed or describe a challenging situation and how you handled it? Dennis, we'll start with you.
Yeah, this is one of those ones that always kind of makes everybody uncomfortable. No one wants to talk about maybe where they didn't excel and where they possibly let a team down or something like that. But be concise, be honest. Don't drag on about it. Don't try and point blame on anybody else. But most importantly, talk about how you rebounded. Talk about how you succeeded. Talk about how you pushed through, and give them an example of not only here's where I messed up, we messed up. However, something got messed up, but here's how I resolved the matter and made it better. I think is always a good thing, because they want to also hear how it's going to happen. It happens to everybody.
Yep, 100% agree, Dennis. It's concise, I think, was the key word there. This is one of those questions where you can really stick to the formula, so to speak. Here's what happened. Here was the challenging situation. Here's what I did to correct it. Here's the result. Here's what helped my employer. And just leave all other context really out of it. It's irrelevant.
Absolutely. And I think by, describing a time that you failed, you're showing the employer humility, which also tells them that you are eager to learn and that you're eager to listen to new ideas. And how should candidates tackle situational or hypothetical questions like, what would you do if? Owen, we'll start with you.
Sure. The best advice is to not stay away from the hypothetical, but divert it back to what you've actually done. Basically, how you've actually made the company money. The hypothetical questions and the behavioral ones, they're almost always work related. What would you do if this happened at work? Generally speaking, if you have an interview with the company, you've done something in your background, you have something that correlates to what this current company is doing. So yeah, it's always best to go back to kind of the same situation. Like, okay, here's what actually happened in my background. Here's how I handled it. Here's how we made more money, or whatever it may be, whatever your goal is.
Yeah. And that's spot on. One thing, especially when it gets into on our side with some of the more technical questions on the IT side, is I always encourage the folks to define the issue. What is the what if scenario? Let's not leave it too vague. If the person asks you what if, ask questions back to really define what that issue is. And then you can kind of analyze it a little bit more and give more specific results on that what if. If it's a very open-ended question, which we know can easily trip folks up in our own personal experiences and being through this process as many times as we all have, really make sure you understand the question. Define what the what if is. What if this happens? Okay, well, what does that look like? What is the consequences of what if happens? And that also forces the manager to kind of engage a little bit more and understand, your critical thinking of how you would process a what if scenario.
Fantastic advice. And how should candidates respond to questions about their weaknesses or areas for improvement? Dennis, we'll start with you.
To touch on one of our previous questions, it's an opportunity to show humility. No employee is perfect by any way, shape, or form. But to also kind of piggyback on a previous answer, be concise. Don't draw on about it. Don't deflect to other members of the organization that might have contributed to it. Own your part of it. Do it briefly, but also, again, if it's a weakness that happened or a weakness that you're working on, tell them how you're developing and growing out of that weakness, how you're turning that weakness into a strength, or what you're doing to improve so that that perceived weakness is now a strength, is now something else, whether it be in the form of education, before of a training, certification, whatever the case may be. How have you overcome that perceived weakness now, and what are you doing to continue to grow? And that's going to excite an employer.
Yeah, Dennis, 100% agree there. Keywords, concise. Second keyword, ownership. Definitely take ownership of the weakness. And then the third part, focus your time on what actionable things, what things you're actually doing or have done to address the problem, and then what's the result.
Definitely. And again, these are questions that you'll have in almost every interview. So once you have those examples chosen, you can hold on to them and you'll be prepared. You'll have them in your back pocket. What are some effective ways to discuss personal and professional growth during an interview? Owen, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I'll start with saying, I would say between the two of these, I would say stick to at least 90 to 95% professional growth with your 5 to 10% personal growth. Keep it, remember the context that you're in. You're interviewing for a job. You're interviewing hopefully to make a company more money or protect their name. So yeah, keep it as professional as you can. If there is a personal anecdote you could throw in there that can help color some things in, by all means do it. But yeah, try to stick as professionally as you can.
Exactly. And that, to kind of expand on that, one of the other suggestions that I tell folks is know your audience. If you can, most hiring managers, most organizations have, a LinkedIn or some sort of social media. I prefer LinkedIn because it's a very professional platform. But see, especially if there's any commonality on professional growth, maybe you've attended and received some similar certifications in the past on how you grew your career, and maybe you're just a few years behind, or anything that you might be able to do that would be able to kind of, or even a shared, maybe they do, some sort of I don't know, from a personal development, they're a member of like a disaster recovery organization or something like that for cybersecurity. That's a non-for-profit or something like that you could see that you say, okay, I do this inside my organization, but I also try to do this. And I see that you did this too, and that'll help also potentially create that bond if it's there to be had.
Absolutely. And I think research is an essential part of an interview. So just consider that part of the interview process, and then you'll have something to go off of. And how should candidates handle questions about salary expectations or compensation negotiations during an interview? Dennis, we'll start with you.
Yeah, this is one that, practicing in that interview process, as you've kind of been touching on here, is important. I always tell the folks that I'm working with is give a range. Don't put yourself in a position where you give a hard set number. Have that knowledge of kind of what your worth is going into the conversation as well too. Just don't be too quick to go Google. Nobody sells their used car for exactly what Google says it is. There's usually a range that comes in, right? And so be prepared to have some leeway in there of where you're going to be comfortable. Also, a lot of times, a lot of laws have changed over the years and stuff like that, where employers will post what the range is that they're looking to potentially offer the salary compensation. So you should have some of that information going in and shouldn't be completely blind of what this position is applying for, what traditionally the market's going to bear on that, and kind of work it in from there. And that when you're asked the question, be prepared to give a bit of a range so that you're not going too low, but not necessarily going too high. And then ask them, does that meet your expectations once you give your information?
Sure. And to piggyback off of that, I would say first off, use a recruiter like System 1. We get paid to, number one, have the sensitive conversations, both with candidates and employers. We have expertise in it. We also get paid to stay current on the information of the market. And also how to best present and characterize, that information to employers. Like I said, it's sensitive. Everybody knows it's sensitive. It's best to leave that to an expert. Absent that, I would say keep this one formulaic as well. You get asked during an interview, here's either where I'm at salary-wise or where I need to be, but then divert it back to, I'm more interested in what the job brings with respect to growth, these duties, stuff that's important to you within the framework of the job, more so than the salary. Try to refocus it that way.
Fantastic. And we do have an episode on salary negotiation. So if you really want to dive deep into that topic, make sure to check out our past Sound Off with System 1 episodes on YouTube. We did have an audience question. I haven't heard this before, but what if someone asks a candidate about their least favorite part of a job, the least favorite part of their role? How would a candidate answer that?
Honestly, that's actually been a question that I've been asked in my past, and I think it's a fair question from an employer to ask that question of what it is. Traditionally, what I found for most folks, it's some sort of kind of like data input, administrative task, or something that may be process oriented that may slow them down or give them the feeling that they're not as effective at the majority part of their job, what they're really good at. And it's something somewhere in there. I think every organization has it to some degree. And so it's not a surprise answer by any means, shape, or form that when I say, oh, I got tied up with, half of my day was spent doing reports where, if I did a full day, I'd produce more XYZ that would make the company more money or something like that tends to be, I think it's a great question. It's a reasonable question.
Yeah, definitely a good question. I mean, if you're looking for an answer to potentially make you shine, I would say pick the duty that has the least to do with revenue generation and say that's your least favorite.
Those are some great workarounds. Thank you both. And are there any resources or tools you recommend for candidates to practice and improve their interview skills? Owen, we'll start with you.
Sure. I would say the key word is just practice. I'm not sure if they're necessarily resources, but I mean, you have friends, you have colleagues, you have people that you can speak with. Practice makes perfect when it comes to interviews and, any relationships. I mean, to paint a picture, I think this is my second sound off call. I feel like it's going more smoothly than the first. Just kind of case in point there.
Perfect point. Yeah. When it comes to this, I agree, a practice, work with others that don't have a conflict of interest with you, other peers or something like that. You may not want to, go to your manager and say, hey, how should I interview for this job? Right. Like you don't want to do something like that, but practice is key. I have found some tools that have been shared with me that are, online on, how to prepare for questions. A lot of the job boards, the big ones like the Indeeds of the world and stuff like that will have different articles. Just that you maybe from a mindset standpoint, you can kind of refresh and kind of remember what an interview process is like in case you haven't done it in a while. And so you can be like, oh yeah, I didn't think about they might ask me this question. And just reading through a couple articles and things like that might be helpful for the individual, especially if they haven't interviewed in a while and they're looking for that practice just to help kind of get their, as I proverbially say, their mind right, prepared, ready to go into that interview and not feel like they're floundering around.
Fantastic. And we do have a question from a viewer. What to say if you don't know an answer to an interview question?
That one may be difficult to directly answer because I feel like context really does matter so much in that. If it's a managerial role, frame it with respect to how you would delegate, how you get the answer. If it's a role that's an individual contributor, I mean, I don't know, there are a lot of factors. It's kind of really difficult to pin an answer down on that.
Yeah, that is a tough one. Be honest. If you don't know the answer, tell them, you know what, I don't know that answer, but tell them how you would figure out the answer. Just kind of like what Owen was saying there. Here's the resources that I would do. Sometimes those curveball questions are thrown in again especially in the technical world, they're thrown out there to see how your critical thinking works. How is your problem solving functioning and stuff like that? So always answer honestly. If you try to kind of flub your way through it and stuff like that, you have more likeliness of seeing dishonest or ignorant, and you don't want to do that. Hey, that's a great question. I don't really know, but here's how I'd figure it out.
Fantastic. And we do have another audience question. We're having some difficulties putting it up on the screen, but when involuntary termination comes up and you've been laid off from your recent role, how does one answer it?
I would say just be as direct as possible. This is, it's a touchy situation because, you want to take ownership of the situation, but it's not on you necessarily. It's really not. A lot of times it's on the company. I would say just be direct, say exactly what happened. Give all the information, just lay it out as is, just without anything else.
Yeah, and you're spot on with that. Be honest. Just say, hey, the company went through a reorganization. Unfortunately, my department or my team or myself was a part of that reorganization, and they went a different way. Hopefully, it parted as amicably as can be. Nobody wants to be laid off, but try to avoid focusing a lot of negativity on the situation or getting really stuck in the minutia, the details, or your feelings necessarily about what happened. We all, I think, as humans, a good, healthy manager can appreciate the fact that it was unpleasant. It wasn't fun. Let's not get stuck in the unpleasantness of the situation and be direct. But one thing I would also caution, because I've had experience with this before, is if that's what happened, say that's what happened. but don't say that's what happened when that's not what really happened, because that will come back to bite you later on. I just, and I've seen it unfortunately happen, is that folks think, oh, well, I'll say this. Be transparent in any way that you shifted out of an organization to the best of your ability. You don't have to get into the details, but don't try and cloak and dagger it, because it can hurt you a lot long. It'll hurt you long run. It'll get
absolutely, and it's something that a lot of people go through too. So very understandable. And how to answer questions about short-term employment stints.
So at least in our world, a lot of people do contract work, and that's kind of the nature of the industry that we're in. So if somebody's working for a short-term stint, traditionally it's a contract, and so you just, as soon as you say the word contract, you were there to do a job. You were kind of a quote unquote proverbial gunslinger. You were coming in to do something for 3 months or 6 months or something along those lines. And then the work was done. There was no more work for you to do. So I was a contract employee. I worked on a contract. I helped them out in the short term, and then I moved on to my next gig. If it's multiple short-term gigs and stuff like that, that gets a little trickier. If you're choosing to job hunt, I'll be honest here, you probably need to look and figure out why you're jumping that many full-time jobs, and really kind of figure out what's happening with your career, why you're not satisfied in the places you're going and choosing to move on, and really maybe have a heart-to-heart with yourself to better understand, okay, how do I find a good home?
Yeah, definitely agree. Being concise, being direct, the two most important things there. And like Dennis said, take a look at yourself, make sure that's actually the case. Was it your intent to have a short-term job? Was it your intent to be on a contract and then move on? Or is it a situation where you're just not happy at place XYZ and keep jumping? Yeah, just make sure you're being honest with yourself and your, future employer.
Absolutely. We're noticing a theme here. And what is a good answer for what sets you apart from your peers and what makes you special?
I feel like that's a really, really difficult one to answer, because it's very much a case-by-case thing. I would say stick towards another theme, revenue generation. Stick towards something that is, going to endear you to your employer. But I mean, everybody has something that separates themselves from their peers. It's, I'd have to give a million different answers for a million different people on that. So I don't know, it's a little tough.
Yeah, Owen, you're hitting spot on it. It's all in context of what the environment is that you're in there. You could be special for different employers in different ways. I recommend folks, when they try to get into that, sometimes that can be a bit of a trick question for people as well too, just to kind of see if their ego may be a little bit too much, and it could, the manager could look at it as, oh, you're going to be a power struggle if I hire you. You're going to be, so you have to be gentle and tactful and say how, and so when the term special comes up, I suggest folks reframe it into, here's the value I believe I can bring your organization, and how I think that would have helped your team, and stay kind of benign to, again, that revenue generation, or what is the value you're bringing as an employee that is going to help that organization be better performing in the market. Here's my value. Here's what I think sets me apart from some other people.
And again, that's where being prepared and having those examples ready to go comes into play. And for our last question, what are some thoughtful questions candidates can ask interviewers to demonstrate their interest and engagement? Dennis, we'll start with you.
It's one of my favorite ones. I think as a candidate, as you're wrapping up the interview, this is your opportunity to really start to ask the questions of the organization. And my favorite kind of go-to is ask the manager to define, or ask the manager or the panel, whoever you're interviewing with, is, could you please define what success would look like for me if I was offered this opportunity here, say in the first 90, 60, or 96 months, 1 year? What does that successful hire look like? What does that look like for me and for you? One thing that I've been trained on many moons ago by a senior recruiter who is amazing is it helps the employer kind of put you in that chair, in that seat, doing that job, because when they have to think about what success looks like for you doing that, they're thinking of you doing that. It also kind of gets them a little more excited about you possibly doing it as well too. And I found it'd be a strong closing, open-ended question that kind of flips the script back on them to give them that opportunity to have to kind of figure out what it looks like. But any thoughtful questions that can demonstrate their interest is also another one is, when can I expect to hear from you? What is your timeline? What are we looking at here? What are the next steps? Anything along those lines that can help kind of figure out if the person, the next steps, hey, my HR is going to be with you, or or the recruiter is going to be back to you in XYZ period of time. We'll let you know. You might kind of have a feeling for where the direction went to on that employer.
Yeah, Dennis, you actually took my answer with the second one.
Sorry,
what are the next steps? Always. I tell that to every candidate I recruit in an interview. Gives you a lot of insight with respect to where you do stand for the reasons Dennis gave. And it obviously pretty directly establishes interest. It takes the guesswork out of it. We get calls all the time from clients that love candidates but have genuine questions as to whether or not they're interested. So being as direct as possible, obviously without coming off desperate, being as direct as possible can only help you.
Absolutely. And I think asking toward the end of the interview too, do you have any hesitations? That way you can address anything last minute and tie up loose ends. Thank you again to our panel. This was excellent advice. And thank you to everyone that commented. We are out of time, but don't forget to follow System 1 on LinkedIn for more Sound Off with System 1 episodes. Our next episode will be Friday, July 19th at 2 p.m., and we will be discussing getting the compensation you deserve. And if you want to see any other past episodes, make sure to check out System 1 on YouTube. We'll see you then.